Here we go. Entrance to Bulow Plantation ruins. And what do I like the best to see? Real Florida. No Disney World or Shamu here. This is the real deal.
This beautiful drive will take us to the ruins of the Bulow Plantation, which was destroyed by the Seminoles in 1836.
This is the site for one of the slave cabins here at Bulow Plantation. And I'm guessing these remnants look like they're made out of coquina. And I would think this is maybe perhaps part of the hearth or some sort of a chimney system. The interpretive signs here really don't go into that much detail. It's just a guess. I was about to leave when I noticed that back in the woods here, just maybe 40 feet to the south of where that, we'll call it the hearth is, there's more kind of coquina rock. Looks like they had been, some of them are cut into squares. You can see right here, and I'm trying not to step on anything, but it corners right there, comes around, there's another corner. You can see how they're laid out purposefully. And just like that, there's another one that's cut kind of a square shape. Now that I get a chance to really look closely at this loose pile of coquina rock, you can see where some of them are shaped, a few into squares. So most likely this is where the cabin was located. Lo and behold, on my way out, look what I found. An ancient pine that had once been used to harvest sap from for naval stores, for tarring sails and caulking boards and ships. And you can still see part of the remnants here of the gutter system that would have been, actually it would have kind of stuck out. The sap would have dripped down it and then would have gone into a hurdy pot. And it's a kind of a clay pot, and then it would have been collected. And this is just a superb example. And you can see the cuts are on the other side as well. And one more thing about that pine tree we just looked at. The method that was used to extract that sap on this particular tree didn't come about till 1902. It gets a little complicated, but what I mean is that they would have used what's called a hurdy pot. And I mentioned that before, I believe. It's a clay pot, but Professor Hurdy didn't come up with this invention until 1902. Prior to that, extraction methods of getting this sap out of the pines, which was much more detrimental to the health of the trees and caused them to die early, whereas the particular method you just saw back there had the cat's paw marks, or those V shapes on two sides of the tree, and the bark remained in between them. In other words, the tree was not girdled, and that's how earlier methods were. So that tree, the sap was probably harvested from it well after the Seminole War and well after the plantation was burnt. So what we're looking at is the sugar mill itself, and it's about a quarter mile from the remnants or the ruins of that slave cabin I showed you earlier. And these ruins, I have to tell you, are really magnificent. Only a $4 entry fee to the Bulow State Park, and well worth it. We haven't even made it over to where the plantation was yet. And there's also a very old, I think the oldest live oak in Florida is on this property as well, from what I understand. Anyway, let's go have a look. Sugar mill is located here. There's a road, comes down to where the plantation was on Bulow Creek, and then the slave cabins would have been kind of in an arc around from where the main home was. And so what they've got here, this is really quite complex. And there are a lot of placards around to explain the process of how sugar was actually made. And I've been around already once to look at it, and even then it's a little bit hard to understand. but the ruins you see here are really quite excellent. There would have actually been 2 floors to the sugar mill, and each section has a purpose to it. These square blocks are made out of a sedimentary rock called coquina, and over the millennia, ancient seashells and mollusks, after they died, the calcium carbonate would leach out of them, and they would kind of compact and form into a solid rock, and they can be cut and used in building supplies. The big fort in St. Augustine, the Castillo de San Marcos, that's what it is famously made out of. There's a mine up there, and actually there's still a mine today not far from where these ruins are that you see. And I'm just going to walk around to give you a look. We have a brick lintel, which can offer support to the heavier parts of the upper structure. And some of this you just have to be able to see just a bit of background on these ruins and how they came to be here in Northeast Florida. Is that a Major Charles Bulow purchased this property, just almost 5,000 acres, in 1821, just after Florida became a territory. A couple of years later, he died, and then his son took it over. It was one of 12 producing sugar mills here in the state. And then along comes 1836, and the Second Seminole War begins, and the Seminoles come and burn the plantation to the ground. By the time it was burnt, all the owners had evacuated, and now you can see the remnants of it today. Really quite extraordinary. You can spend a lot of time here, and they have a lot of informational placards around to help explain the process of making sugar, which I think I mentioned earlier. To me, it's quite complex. And they have a little interpretive center also next door. You can't go inside it, but you can walk around and look through the windows at different relics and artifacts that were recovered from the plantation. And of course, one of them that I was really enamored with, since I am kind of a old bottle aficionado, is a round bottom bottle from Dublin, Ireland. They think it's an ale. I have found bottles similar to it that contain carbonated water, but in any case, I thought it was a really good specimen. And then they also show other bottles. And in the information center, they say, I guess when this place was excavated by the archaeologists, they found many, many bottles here, which just the thought of it makes me all warm and fuzzy. So I think now we're going to go over and check on where the plantation house was to complete this tour. Here's what they're saying is a well. Exact use is unknown. Now, to me, it looks like a cistern. It too is made out of coquina rock. And the cisterns, a lot of them would have had some sort of a gutter system from the top of a home or business, and that gutter would have run down and into the cistern. Now, if this was a well, obviously it would go way deep, and we're right close to the salt water, so I'm not sure about the quality of the water if they had dug a well. Yeah, a lot of these wells or cisterns, they kind of look similar, so we don't know how deep that coquina rock, the curvature of that well goes into the ground. If it goes way down, obviously it's probably a well, but if it only goes like a foot deeper and has a mortared bottom, that's going to be a cistern, and there would have been a gutter system coming off the roof and over to it. I've seen that in several places. In fact, I was up at Fort Pulaski a couple of weeks ago, up along the Georgia coast, and they had a a small community adjacent to the fort where they had a trading post and a boarding house and so forth. And it, very distinctly, it showed that there were a lot of gutters that ran from the top of the roofs down to the cisterns, and those cisterns are out there still in the ground today, that anybody can go and visit and look at. So I always find how they acquired water to be really interesting, because that was that's the bottom line part of survival in what would have been the frontier of Florida back then. We're making our way back out now, but obviously this is where they would have had a fire to create the heat to boil up the, I guess they call it the molasses from the sugar cane that was grown here. And gosh, what an operation. Look at that chimney. My goodness. Now here's where a second well was located. And it could be that this did not operate like a cistern would, where there's some kind of gutter system, you know, coming off the roof and then running down here to fill it. It could be that this was an actual well that went way deep. And so now we're just going to make our way out and drive on down the road a little bit and check out the Plantation House. For those of you who are not from Florida and are not familiar with this plant, it's quite famous. It is actually a palm. It's called the coontie palm, C-O-O-N-T-I-E. The Native Americans here used to dig up the roots. They have these big bulbous roots that kind of look like potatoes. They actually had a process where they would mash it to form kind of a flour, and then they would have to be drained twice to leach the, I don't want to call it poisons, but there's stuff in there that will probably make you very sick before it can be made into a form of a bread. And a little bit more about the coontie palm. There was a factory in Southwest Florida back around the late 1800s that was actually processing 10 to 15 tons of coontie palm roots every day. So it is edible, but there's a process you have to go through to make it edible and not poisonous. And so, and I don't know if poison is the right word, but that's what I'm going to call it, so that you can eat it and you're not going to have any ill effects. So yeah, the coontie palm is quite, it is indigenous to Florida, and it's ubiquitous along the coast. I've just walked, I don't know, 100 feet from where my truck is parked over here to one of the information placards. And this is what they believe the Bulow Plantation house would have looked like. This is not the house because it was burnt at the very beginnings of the Second Seminole War. But this is a rendering, I guess, that looks pretty close to it. And nowhere here, and maybe I'm missing it, and if I'm taking a leap here that I shouldn't, I hope all the historians forgive me, but maybe this little bit of coquina here that you see and that they have fenced off is all that remains of the plantation house proper. Now, apparently there are some old boat slips still visible over here. There's a better look at the creek. Quite attractive. It looks like it does have some depth to it. Obviously it's high tide right now, but the boat slips they're referring to, and we're going to walk around, there's a little trail, hopefully we can see them, should have been right in here. Now, several years ago, I used to hunt on a piece of property a couple miles up this way where the Bulow Creek was quite narrow and flowed through it. Even on that property, there were natural outcroppings of coquina rock. And we are now at the location where the boat slips are. And I guess I should say past tense were, although you can still see the remnants of how the bank has been excavated out. And it looks like this just would have been filled with water. I'm sure it is, over the years, it has filled in with debris and everything. But I suspect it was 3 or 4 feet deeper than you see here, and they just would have been able to pull a flatboat in or a small launch, load it, back it out, and take off. So that's one boat slip. And here's a large slab of coquina rock. For what use, I don't know. And here's the remnants of another boat slip, it looks like right here. It's a little easier for me to see the indentation here, although I think on this one is quite visible. You can clearly see how it cuts into the bank and ends right here below where this path goes through the woods. Oh, okay, so we've got I thought that was it for the boat slips. It looks like we've got even more, or at least one more. And let's see. Yeah, here's another one. Had a cedar tree fall in it. Very cool. I don't know, maybe there's more. So these boat slips, I don't know if they had a dock out here or any kind of a wharf. They may have, but when they excavated in to where, kind of makes a rectangle form, almost a short canal, if you will, probably made it a lot easier, a lot more efficient to move the vessels in and out. And finally, I believe the old plantation would have been right in here. And then we have a pond filled with lily pads. Might be this little spot here for water. Could have been for a bird bath. I'm just taking a guess. It could have been it may have had an entirely different use, but still, it's kind of cool. And it is right next to where I think the plantation was. So that may have been its purpose. And so finally, to offer you all icing on the cake after our tour of the Bulow Plantation, we have the Fairchild Oak, the largest and oldest oak tree in the state of Florida. The source material for the age of this tree is just all over the place. This placard right here, and I'll get you up to it. Okay, the valuable forms of plant life, something about 2,000 years. Here, although in the other online source material says it's 800 years old and then 400 years old. No matter which way you want to go on that or believe, this is one big live oak. And this is the kind of tree a couple hundred years ago that would have been harvested and cut into what's called ship's knees, which are they were kind of wedges and used to put in the bow of a ship to brace it. Actually, this example I'm showing you was from the Union transport ship's Maple Leaf, and it was recovered by divers here several decades ago and can be seen in the Mandarin Museum. So there's a couple of things interesting about this tree. For those of you who aren't from Florida, you might not be familiar with this green plant that's growing on the trees. It's called the resurrection fern. And at times of good rain, there will be, a vibrant green and look alive. And during a drought, it'll dry to a brown and appear to be dead. As soon as fresh water hits it again, it'll come alive. And thus the name, the resurrection fern. And you can see all along the top of that limb. I also noticed over here, just as a curiosity, probably 60, 70 feet away from the main trunk, we have another oak tree growing out of the ground, parallel to the ground. Yeah, I believe that this was originally snapped off from the larger tree, and somehow part of the blunt end ended up in the ground. It rooted to form another oak tree, which I think is very cool. And I don't think it's much of a leap. I've been in Florida all my life. I've been a game warden for 30 years. I have seen a lot of live oaks. This is not how live oaks normally grow. No, not at all. They do not start out with the trunk. Technically, this is the trunk here growing parallel to the ground. They start out with the trunk being vertical, just like all these other trees. And so anyway, I find it interesting. And if that is what indeed happened here, that this was originally the limb from the Fairchild Oak, I just find it hugely interesting. Hey guys, real quick, I'm running out of juice. That's going to wrap it up for today. Hope you enjoyed the Fairchild Oak. If you would like to learn more about me, check out my website, bobhlee.com. It is in the description below. Other than that, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.